And in this video we're going to look at the last of the four ideologies we're going to study, and just to recap on 5 key thinkers named per ideology. We can use other thinkers, but they won't get into the assessment criteria unless they're named key thinkers. And so if you don't name the 2 key thinkers, you're going to get capped at level 2, and if you don't have a balanced argument, you'll also get capped at level 2. So fourth and final ideology is feminism. And you must remember that across all 3 papers that you're going to do in the whole syllabus, feminism is the only topic that you're guaranteed to get a question on. In fact, you're going to get a choice of 2 possible feminism essays on paper 2 as your optional ideology. So it's worth spending a little bit more time in your revision on feminism. Yes, it's only 24 marks out of your altogether 252, but with grade boundaries so tight, it's worth spending a little bit of extra time, and it's also a nice win in the paper as well. You should be well able to do either of the 2 feminism questions because you know they're going to come up. So key thinkers in feminism: Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, Sheila Rowbotham, and Bell Hooks. And the 2 other thinkers we're going to use, we've come across before: Betty Friedan in liberalism and Engels in socialism. So the first one is Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and she's a very interesting figure. She cuts across many of the themes within feminism. Again, develops some of the themes from earlier liberal feminists such as Wollstonecraft. That, women are the moral and intellectual equivalent of men. They're equally rational, and there is a nice quote from Gilman that you could include to show that. There is no female mind. The brain is not an organ of sex. You might as well speak of a female liver. This idea that very men and women are equal, which kind of tip into the kind of androgynous aspect as well. She's also into this idea of personal autonomy, personal fulfillment, self-actualization, which tips into modern liberalism as well. Every kind of creature is developed by the exercise of its functions. If denied the exercise of its functions, it cannot develop in its fullest degree. And again, you can link that into modern liberalism as well, I suppose, positive freedom. But really, it's about self-actualization, etc. She also highlighted the impact of socialization, the argument that young girls are forced to conform into their predestined role as mothers, and prevent harmful social conditioning of girls. Gilman believed in neutral clothes. There should be no difference in the clothes that little children wear or the toys that they play with, which is quite advanced for when she was writing. And that argument was really an early form of what was called the politics of sameness, as we see it as a phrase from de Beauvoir. We'd probably call it more androgynous, which again is a key theme within feminism. There's no difference between the differences between sex and gender. Sex is biological and gender is socially constructed. And Gilman also taps into some of the themes of socialist feminism. And she wrote a book, Women in Economics, in 1898, and she argued for equal contribution to the domestic division of labour, because, as socialist feminists would argue, the domestic environment was an instrument of patriarchy. And Gilman noted that women were financially reliant on their husbands, and this uneven power structure meant that women had to trade sexual favours for the protection of menfolk. This idea that women are socially or economically reliant on the men, calls of socialist feminism for paid domestic work to relieve women of the dependency of men. So that's Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and you can see in the quotes how she does cut across several of the themes in feminism and several of the strands as well. Next key thinker is Simone de Beauvoir. Again, she cuts across several aspects of feminism. French intellectual, she was part of the left bank existentialist groupings led, I suppose, by Sartre. And like Gilman, de Beauvoir can fit into several strands and themes of feminism. And the book she's most noted for in terms of feminism would be The Second Sex. And the core argument in that book was that men basically fundamentally oppress women by characterizing themselves as the other. They're defined exclusively in opposition to men. And you can find a nice kind of contemporary resonance to this in Carolyn Grader-Pers's book Invisible Women, which is really well worth a read, that women are somehow the other, or they're just simply forgotten, that men are the default and women are somehow the other. Beauvoir asks in second, what is woman? And again, man is considered the default and woman is the other. And then she says, thus humanity is male and man defines woman not as herself but as relative to him. And she then goes on to claim that the social construct of women is deliberately created to benefit men, and women are conditioned into accepting a passive role in life and forced to take inordinate care over things like their appearance, which again occurs through a process of socialization. And the quote that's most associated with her, women are made not born. I think the actual original quote is one becomes rather than is born a woman. So there's a nice little video on the playlist on the YouTube channel as well, which covers this topic as well. De Beauvoir also championed the notion of androgyny, which we saw the term with Gilman. She called the politics of sameness, and she believed that equality could only be achieved by a kind of androgynous ideal. And in her words, this could only occur when there would no longer be men and women, but only workers equal with one another. So very much can be used for the androgynous strand. But she was also firmly in the radical feminist strand as well. She was very critical of the family structure, and she argued that the destruction of patriarchal institutions was necessary for female emancipation or liberation. And she went further. She was in favour of abolishing the family unit altogether. So again, you can see in the quotes, as long as the family and the myth of family is not being destroyed, women will still be oppressed. The most mediocre of males feels himself a demigod compared with women. And again, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. So again, de Beauvoir can be used in support of several aspects of feminism. Next other thinker is Betty Friedan, which we saw in liberalism, but she probably fits more comfortably into feminism, although she's not a key thinker. And we saw in liberalism, I think it was mentioned that in the late 50s, she went to a reunion of her graduating class, and she did a survey of her classmates and how they actually used their education. And she found that most of 90% were not using it. They were simply housewives who were very unhappy in their role. And there's a clear echo of this in the Rosamunda Pike character in Made in Dagenham, which we will watch. And there's a nice little snatch of that on the YouTube playlist as well. And Friedan in The Feminine Mystique basically argued that greater political equality hadn't led to greater equality for women, and women were still confined to a domestic role, reinforced by this cultural myth that women have security and fulfillment in domestic life and feminine behaviour, that this myth prevented women from entering the public life. And they had been manipulated and persuaded in the belief that their only fulfillment lay in domesticity, and this was reinforced. It's very much an American focus of women's magazines and the advertising industry, and you can think of those sort of Norman Rockwell pictures, the ideal family theme. And so the whole of a woman's life was geared towards attracting and keeping a husband and serving the needs of him and his children. And they were surrounded by these new consumer goods, the TV, the car, the house, the washing machine, etc. But none of these, or this multiplicity of consumer goods, couldn't compensate for the frustration and unhappiness they felt. And she said, the problem that has no name, which is simply the fact that American women are kept from growing to their full human capacities, again, this kind of liberal strand all the way through, is taking a far greater toll on the physical and mental health of our country than any known disease. And women were isolated in that very striking phrase, issues, their own comfortable concentration camp, and ashamed to show that they were frustrated. Why couldn't they be happy with all these wonderful things around them, and not conscious that other women were feeling the same. And so Friedan, very much in the liberal feminist strand, she champions more legal reforms, equal pay, anti-discrimination, liberalisation of divorce and abortion laws. And it was felt that these changes would make it easier for women to enter the public sphere if they wanted to. And you see some of the later criticisms of the feminine mystique was, it's very much aimed at white middle-class women, where employment is seen as a means of fulfilment, rather than for some women where it would be an economic necessity. Next key thinker is Kate Millett. And Millett, like all radical thinkers, put patriarchy front and centre in their criticisms. And a bit like Marx in his History of the World, and Millett did a survey on Western literature. And she finds that the one constant in history was gender oppression and patriarchy. And she said that female oppression is both political and cultural. And she defines or redefines politics as power-structured relationships in which one group control another, and very firmly locates the origin of female oppression within the private sphere, in the family. And those nice phrases, politics doesn't stop at the front door. And the family is a political institution. It's not part of private life, and rows over who does the washing up or who has the remote control. They're not part of private life, but they're part of a wider power struggle. And the family is the main agent of socialisation. It's patriarchy's chief institution. And again, this was echoing what de Beauvoir had said previously. De Beauvoir, as long as the family and the myth of the family has not been destroyed, women will still be oppressed. And Millett, like other radical feminists, echo the revolutionary language of socialism, where socialists would argue for a class war or a class revolution. Radical feminists argue for a sexual revolution, and the way to do this would be by consciousness raising by women. And again, like de Beauvoir, she advocated undoing the traditional family unit, which is the path to sexual revolution. So, are feminists revolutionary? Well, liberal feminists are not. The reformists, socialist feminists, as we see, are revolutionary, but it's a social revolution, capitalism. Radical feminists are revolutionary, but in a different sense. They argue for a sexual revolution. And one of the debates in feminism between sort of essentialists and androgynists, and Millett is a kind of step in both camps. There isn't really an essentialist thinker in this, so I'm not sure what kind of essay they could possibly ask on it. But Millett was active in campaign groupings such as Now, which is very much a liberal group in America. But she was also part of radical lesbians, and they're a kind of unusual combination, and they're very different types of groups, and often in tension with each other. I mean, Friedan was very critical and wary of the separatist or lesbian strand of radical feminism. I think she said, described it as the lavender menace. But again, Mill is very much a radical feminist thinker, locating female oppression very much in family structure, the private sphere, and patriarchy front and centre. The next two key thinkers then are to do with socialist feminism. And we came across Engels before, and ironically, the classic text of socialist feminism written by a man, Engels, The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And Engels, again, although some feminists and later socialist feminists would argue that patriarchy predated the emergence of capitalism, Engels argued the emergence of capitalism had brought new forms of oppression to bear on women, specifically to the emphasis on private property owned by men and passed down to the male heirs, and to this institution of the bourgeois family. Engels used some striking phrases. He says women's economic independence on her husband meant that within the family, the man was the bourgeois and the wife represented the proletariat, that the family was a system of exploitation as well. And for socialist feminists, both men and women are exploited by capitalism, but because woman has a subordinate position to the man in the family, she was in effect the slave of a slave. Very, very striking phrase. And again, Gilman is also writing similarly about the same thing, although she's not necessarily classified as a socialist feminist. She said the female of the genus Homo is economically dependent on the male. He is her food supply. And so socialists would say the family is a bourgeois family. It's merely an instrument of control over women. It serves the needs of capitalism, and we looked at how it does that in a number of ways. Women in the reserve army of labour, they bear and rear the socialised workers, they relieve male burdens of the burden of housework, they provide the incentive for the male worker to be a very biddable worker, and they provide relief and solace to the poor old oppressed male worker when he comes home for his 12 hours in the factory. And capitalism, gets two for the price of one, because the female labour in the home is unwaged, and only the man gets the wage. So the bourgeois family is an institution, it's a construct that supports capitalism. So female oppression originates in the public sphere. So socialists have this kind of public-private divide as well, but it originates in the public sphere, in the economic structure of society, and spreads into the family to support the economic structure of society. But Engels, again, we could mention in passing, but the key thinker in the syllabus as a socialist example of socialist thinkers is Sheila Rowbotham. Rowbotham argues that capitalism systematically oppresses both the working class and women, that women have to suffer this double whammy of capitalism and patriarchy. So in a way, you can kind of see it's kind of an early foreshadowing of the idea of intersectionality, or a kind of intersectionality. So women are forced to sell their labour to survive, and forced to use their labour to support the husband and the children. And again, echoing Engels, within capitalism, the family unit is really an instrument of control over women to facilitate the production and reproduction of men's labour. It supports the capitalist system by allowing the man to go out to work, and it provides relief and solace, etc. She also notes that the origins of sexism predate capitalism. So the original socialist feminists would say, you fight the class war, not the sex war, that you get rid of capitalism, therefore the position of women will improve. But of course they looked at the experience of women in communist countries like Soviet Russia, and their situation didn't really improve. Left-wing men could be just as sexist, just as misogynistic, just as prejudiced as right-wing men. And so therefore they say that, patriarchy predated capitalism, but women suffer from both, and they are interlinked systems of oppression. And so the phrase, I couldn't find that many really to associate with Gilman, is that you need to have a revolution within a revolution. You both need to get rid of capitalism in a revolution, and once that's done, you need to get rid of the patriarchal structures in society as well. Because she said without that second revolution, the first revolution to get rid of capitalism would only be another coup d'etat among men. There was a nice quote from Dorothy Thompson, who was a historian, describing sort of Rowbotham, and she said she understands that a woman smoking quietly in the corner of the factory floor has a fight on her hands, keeping her kids in shoes. So a nice, very empathetic quote there, describing Rowbotham. But you did say, you can pull in Gilman as well if you're talking about socialist feminism, which leads on to the last key thinker, which is Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is the pen name for the activist Gloria Watkins, and Bell Hooks is very much part of third wave feminism. And third wave feminism, unlike the previous two waves, has this greater stress on the politics of difference. And the previous two waves really looked at the differences between men and women, and third wave feminism looks at the differences between individual women or groups of women, kind of draws on postmodernism. And so they would argue that from a third wave perspective or postmodern perspective, that the struggles of groups of women may be connected, links in the oppression, but they are not the same. Different groups of women suffer different types of oppression in different contexts. And they also, third wave feminists, particularly black feminism, sought to address what they felt was very much the previous overemphasis on white middle class women in developed societies. So third wave feminism, this has a greater emphasis on diversity or intersectionality, the term used by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. So it looks at like black women, Asian women, working class women. And where previous discussions or theories of inequality or discrimination tended to focus on single factors, gender, whether your class or race or sexual orientation, intersectionality refers to the idea that these different factors do not act independently, but they're interconnected and interact with each other. As Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, when she was saying how I think there was women in a Ford plant in Detroit were discriminated against for two reasons. One, because they were women, and also because they were black women. So their race and their gender intersected to cause their disadvantage. And then if you're a black working class woman, you could have a third factor, the fact that your class was intersecting as well. That you can't have these one single kind of meta reasons why people are discriminated against. There are several things that can interact. And so Bell Hooks, in her book, Ain't I a Woman? She looked at the historical impact of sexism and racism on black women and kind of the devaluation of black womanhood. And Michelle Obama has some things to say about this and how she was criticised by white feminists in America for saying she was going to be mom-in-chief. And she had specific reasons, giving her background, that she emphasised she wanted to be mom-in-chief. But white liberal feminists were appalled by this. And Bell Hooks identified the role played by the media and education in the construction of what she would see as a kind of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And therefore she draws attention to the experience of women of colour and black women, and critical of the previous wave. She said, it is obvious that many women have appropriated feminism to serve their own ends, especially those white women who have been at the forefront of the movement. And so she goes beyond the kind of emphasis of previous waves, because liberal feminism was about personhood, very much androgynous individuals. And then sort of radical feminism was about sisterhood, this idea of solidarity among women, whereas Bell Hooks and similar writers open it out and would argue for what you call solidarity, that you can have empathy across different groups. They all just don't have to be women. Different groups are oppressed, a bit like the term was used in the Rainbow Coalition, can join together to help as well. And so, again, Bell Hooks, nice inclusion in the syllabus as the final key thinker, and looking very much at third wave feminism, and then within third wave feminism, pretty much on intersectionality and also black feminism as well. So, key thinkers then, Perkins Gilman, Simone de Beauvoir, who can fit into several aspects of feminism. Kate Millett, very much radical feminism, and if you had to pull in a bit of essentialism, her as well. Rowbotham, very much the representative of socialist feminism, but you could choose Gilman as well. And Bell Hooks, the third wave, intersectionality, black feminism, criticisms of the previous two ones. Friedan very much represents the liberal strand, and Engels you could mention briefly before going